Ash, John, 10 years ago to this day, a masterpiece was released. That's right, Super Mario Galaxy 2 came to the Switch, and I think blew past most people's expectations. At least it blew past my own. This was my game of the decade for 2010, by the way. Put together a whole presentation for it. And from that, I actually ended up replaying the entire game, I loved it so much. So yeah, we had to get together and talk about Super Mario Galaxy 2 and its 10th anniversary, which for me might be one of the best 3D Marios, but we'll touch on that soon. So before I drone on and on, let's get to your guys' overall thoughts on Mario Galaxy 2 and where you were at the time, 10 years ago. Let's go ahead and start off with you, Ash. So yeah, what's your impression of Mario Galaxy 2 and where were you at when it released?
God, where has the time gone? How's it
Right?
been 10 years already? Oh, man. Well, it's funny. I actually ended up getting Mario Galaxy 2 at a midnight launch at a Best Buy in West LA. So I just, took a late night drive, got it at like 12:30 a.m. or whatever, and I was so excited. Like, I was extraordinarily hyped for Galaxy 2. Back before it came out, I couldn't wait. I was counting down the days. And I just came home and pretty much played it all night, I think, until probably 4 in the morning, until I just fell asleep or something. And I was super happy with it. Like, my first impression was, this is absolutely the game I've been waiting for. Kind of as you said, Andre, even though it began life as kind of an expansion pack for Super Mario Galaxy in terms of them just all the ideas they didn't have room for in the original, they kind of, are putting into Galaxy 2. It felt fresh to me. It didn't, of course, feel as fresh as Galaxy 1. I mean, you can't really ever quite recreate that feeling, I don't think, just because Galaxy 1 was so new. The concept of it was so new. It turned the entire concept of a 3D platformer on its head.
Literally.
And I don't... Literally, exactly. And I don't, as great as Galaxy 2 is and as many new ideas as it had, it didn't quite recreate that feeling for me. But that's just because it's just not new, and you can't do anything about it. But, I mean, otherwise, it was Galaxy 1, but just full of crazy new ideas. And of course, the biggest deal for me was Yoshi. I'm a big Yoshi fan anyway. He's like my second favorite Nintendo character. And, to me, you can't really have Mario without Yoshi. Obviously, you can. There are plenty of games where Yoshi doesn't appear, but
like Mario Galaxy.
It always feels like... Yeah, exactly. I mean, perfect. But it always feels like there's a void when he's not around. Right. Like in Galaxy 1, Super Mario 64.
Which, by the way, is why Mario World is better than Mario 3, just for the record.
Hey, I completely agree with you there. I agree. World definitely is better than 3. And yeah, it's funny. I have said in a few different places, in a few different ways, that Galaxy 1 actually is my preferred Galaxy game in the sense that I like Galaxy 1 more overall. But Galaxy 2 has Yoshi, and it's an amazing game besides, and so it's hard to really quantify the two, because they're both such special games. But I remember how hype I was for Galaxy 2 at the time, and that first time that I booted up and I heard the Sky Station Galaxy music, I was like, I'd come home. I was like, this is the game I've been waiting for, and I look back on it fondly. There are things about it I don't like, and I think I've probably talked to you about them before, Andre, during even your Game of the Decade discussion. But despite there being stuff I don't like about Galaxy 2 and in an overall, I guess, design sense, it's still a fantastic game, and there's very little negative I can say about it.
So I think I was 15 when this game came out 10 years ago.
Jeez. I love it.
You were just a little older than me than when Mario 64 came out, for my age.
Jesus, does that make you feel old?
Yes, John! Why do you get to bring that up?
Yes!
Such an old man. So I was 15, and a group of my friends were so excited for this game. And I remember when it was announced at E3, I put a bunch of the trailers onto my PSP and came into school one day and showed them all the E3 trailers. So we gathered round, we watched the Mario Galaxy 2 trailer, the Metroid Other M trailer, and we're like, look how good Other M looks! And then it came out, but with Galaxy 2 though, I remember it came out on the day of my last exam. And so I was just waiting for that exam to be over so I could rush home, go to the shop, get Galaxy 2, and start playing it. And it was just such a relief, like to be sort of constrained with all these exams going on, and then this being the ultimate stress relief at the end of all that. And it delivered for me. For me, it was kind of a different concept, because Mario, in its 30-year history, doesn't really do sequels. Very few games are actually direct sequels to another.
Right.
Like we have, Mario Brothers 2, I guess Yoshi's Island, but that's stretching it.
It's really stretching it.
It's really stretching, even though it's called Mario World 2. But so the idea to do not only a 3D sequel, but a Mario sequel is kind of uncharted territory, or at least in since Super Mario Brothers: The Lost Levels, I guess.
Right, the Japanese version, yeah.
Yeah. But it was warranted though, because this game has so many more ideas, and to me, I can't really position which one I prefer of the two Galaxy games, because they both have such great levels, and when you look at them, I can't imagine having one without the other. And they both do different things as well. I think Galaxy 2 has, I guess, more streamlined levels. There are less sandboxy ones. But that's okay, it's more focused, and it does more exhilarating things as well, like larger enemies. Mm-hmm. There are worlds where you just have these giant Goombas and Piranha Plants, and on the screen you can have all these Shadow Marios. It just felt bigger, and a little bit more ambitious. But at the same time, it is also just more Mario Galaxy.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. I equated it to Portal in my Game of the Decade discussion, I believe. At least I think I did. Where, in both cases, the initial game presented an entirely new way of playing. Like I've said before, my initial experience with Mario Galaxy was very similar to Portal, where, like, the new mechanics with the whole gravity idea and how you can run around these spheres, like, blew my mind in a way similar to Portal, and it was just fun just to play with those core mechanics. But then you have a sequel that comes along that uses that same base, so it's no longer as fresh, as Ash was touching on, but then it builds on in such a way that it almost completely mitigates that factor. They add so many new ideas based on the mechanics you're already familiar with, that it creates just an overall, at least for me, a stronger whole. So, like, whereas in Portal 2, like, I find, I still love Portal 1, but I think I would say Portal 2 is probably the better game. I think I would say the same about Mario Galaxy. I think Mario Galaxy might possibly be the better first experience because it was such a mind-blowing thing at the time. Like, we hadn't seen gameplay of that nature before. But when it comes to revisiting these, I think Mario Galaxy 2 is going to win every time for me. But to be fair, I need to revisit Mario Galaxy 1 at some point to make sure that's the case. But yeah, I don't want to diminish either game because they're both fantastic. And the fact that Mario Galaxy 2 was able to follow up on that game in a very direct way, as you're saying, John, that Mario doesn't do, is so incredibly impressive. And being on the same hardware, using the same basic interface, it just really thoroughly impressed me with how fun it is. And that's really it. This game is just wall-to-wall fun from start to finish. There isn't a moment that I wasn't having an absolute blast with this game, except for maybe one thing that I'll get to a little bit later. But on the whole, this game is just a sheer joy where I'm smiling almost the entire way through. And I think part of that too is this might be getting into a little bit of a debate here. What I love about this game, I think, is that there's no downtime. Especially between levels. Like, you get back to the hub, which I know some people aren't the biggest fans of, but for me, I loved it. Like, I go right back in the next stage. There's literally no downtime at all in Mario Galaxy 2, and it's just a sheer joy the entire way.
I'm torn about the face ship because I think it makes more sense as a hub for Mario Galaxy, because the Comet Observatory is such a flat hub, which doesn't make much sense when the levels are planetoids. Well, most of them are anyway.
The fact that you can drop off the observatory always bugged me. I'm like, I'm in space, why can't I go to the bomb of the observatory like I can everything else in the game?
Yeah, but at the same time though, it's not much of a sandbox and there's not much you can really do on the face ship. So in a sense, I kind of prefer the observatory, but again, there's not much you can do there either. They're both kind of weak.
Yeah, I'm with John on this one. I always just preferred the slightly more open nature of Galaxy 1. I really like the hub area. The Comet Observatory, I don't know, it carries a lot of positive memories for me. I loved seeing it slowly come back to life. As you
Have you tried revisiting it though?
I did several years ago, and I still really enjoyed it, but to be fair, I haven't revisited both games in their entirety, so kind of like you, Andre, I can't say for sure. But I think for me, Galaxy 2, I'm glad they both exist because they're both different takes on a similar formula. And so Galaxy 2, as you said, Andre, is more focused. There's, less downtime. It has a more traditional Mario 3 style world map. I didn't like that as much, at least at the time, but I think it's an interesting take on what Galaxy 1 did. It's an alternative take on what Galaxy 1 did. And it results in a different feeling game. Like, Galaxy 2 feels a bit smaller and more compact to me. It doesn't feel like it's as epic or as large or explorative a game as Galaxy 1, but I think that's by design. And as you said, it's more streamlined, it's more focused, and that gives a different kind of experience with the Super Mario Galaxy template. And I really enjoy having that hub world, though, and that, I guess maybe that comes from my love of Super Mario 64 and such, where I really, and of course the Comet Observatory is not nearly as interesting to explore as Peach's Castle, obviously, but I liked having that kind of additional area to kind of explore and take a breather and see what's going on as you brought the observatory back to life. And I just felt the world map to be strangely limiting for a game of Galaxy scale. I think it's good that it existed as an alternative take on this, but I just never really enjoyed. I don't know. I felt like I had seen that already in Mario 3, and it wasn't the kind of experience I wanted in Galaxy. I wanted to be able to explore more, or at least feel like I was exploring more.
You kind of touched on a lot of points there. I feel like a lot of terrain is covered in that. I get what you're saying. I think the key thing is both games are going about similar concepts in a slightly different way, and I think what both did worked for what they were going for at the time that they released. And Mario Galaxy 2 did step back a little bit from the space theme, with more, you weren't in space quite as often, it felt like, and I'm sure that's by design, and I don't personally mind. I know some do. But I think owing to that is partially why, we had this giant spaceship in Mario Galaxy 1. They did want to convey that, hey, you're in space, this is kind of a more open environment. But on the other hand, like looking back, that hub was a little bit at odds with the core gameplay itself, where the hub was a little bit open and that you could go between these observatories. But that was basically about it, whereas the gameplay itself was pretty linear. The stages, there isn't much room for exploration within the stages themselves. You're going from the start to the end, and in that sense, even though the hub was a little bit Mario 64-esque, even if it wasn't nearly to the same scale, it was the levels themselves were anything but. And I think that's why I think I probably prefer Mario Galaxy 2 looking back, just because it seems a better fit for the game design itself, which is overall linear. But I get where you're coming from, and I think I like that both games tried something different, and I think what they were going for worked for the overall design ethos of both of them.
Mm-hmm. When you said about a lot more Galaxy 2 levels not being in space, that's a great point, because when I think Galaxy 2, I think blue skies, whereas Galaxy 1's just sort of this black backdrop, because there are so many more levels that they still have planetoids, and you're still jumping around from planet to planet, but a lot of them just take place in these sort of daytime-looking areas,
or a fenced-in giant yard.
I think the first level where you find Yoshi, I think that's a blue sky as well. So it kind of sets the tone for what the rest of the game's going to be like.
Yeah, that's the first real level, but there's an introductory level that does take place in space.
Right.
But yeah, you're totally right. And it is just kind of interesting to see that slight shift. And I think that's why I kind of like that, because it feels like it gives Mario Galaxy 1 still its own kind of unique style, because you are in space so often, and some of the elements in that game weren't used much, if at all, in Mario Galaxy 2. Like the Pulse Stars, for instance, which I enjoyed in Mario Galaxy, are barely seen in this game, which is probably largely because Yoshi has a similar mechanic with his tongue, and they focused more on that, and I'm totally cool with that. I freaking adore Yoshi, and how he plays in this game.
Yoshi's fascinating because he's a power-up in and of himself. But then they put on power-ups on top of that power-up.
They learned it.
You've got Yoshi with his tongue, and he can also do a flutter jump. And then there's also the pepper to make him go faster. You can make him inflate like a balloon. You can make him illuminate paths. It's insane the amount of a variety they get out of this one little just power-up.
You can run on water.
Yeah. Speaking of running on water as well, there's also one level where you can sort of push a lily pad around. I'm not sure that's really used again. It just sort of shows you how many ideas this game has that you can throw. They can just throw them away, even though this is a sequel that's trying to use even more ideas. They just have so many that they go along at such a rapid pace.
This reminds me of one particular. There might have been two levels. I think maybe it was one level with a special Comet version that was even harder. But there's a level with Yoshi where you have to use a bunch of peppers to guide him through over a wall, but it's like a side view. It was so frustrating at the time, but still really exhilarating. And I remember being so happy when I beat that stage. This is so interesting because I think if I were to go back and play both, I think gameplay-wise, I would probably find 2 to be the more interesting game after all these years in terms of how they both hold up, but there is a kind of a je ne sais quoi quality to Galaxy 1 that I can't quite quantify, that in the sense that, and I've said this to you before, Andre, that for me, Galaxy 1 was the first time Mario had felt truly epic, and that was by design. You know, they had this big, dramatic setup of Mario having to go to the center of the universe to save Peach this time, and it felt like the stakes were higher than they'd ever been before, and not that Mario has to have that, obviously it's Mario, but I like that about it. I thought it was kind of a cool twist for Mario, for it to feel like, man, this is a grand, epic adventure, the stakes are higher than ever. And then, of course, there were the storybook sequences with, you know, kind of going into Rosalina's backstory, and they were so shockingly poignant, especially for a Mario game, and I just really liked that slightly more somber tone that Galaxy 1 created, kind of both more somber and more epic, whereas Galaxy 2 kind of went for more of a straightforward, hey, this is a Mario game, you know, is that Miyamoto effect, right? We're not doing anything with the story, we're not, you know, this is just another Mario game, but we're going to go crazy with the gameplay. And that has value in itself. And that to a lot of people, I think that has more value. And I'm not overlooking that, but I just really, Galaxy 2 didn't create that same feeling of not just wonder, but just epicness on a grand scale, and especially that surprising sense of poignance with Rosalina's backstory. And it just seemed like all that took a backseat in Galaxy 2, again, by design, and a lot of people love that, but that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, even if, again, the gameplay itself and all the crazy ideas they have in Galaxy 2 have probably held up better if I were to go back and play them both right now.
How can you say it's not a grander scale? Bowser's huge in this game, Ash. No, I know what you mean.
That final boss, by the way, with Bowser, I think is better than Mario Galaxy's final boss, where it does feel just grander, and it probably would have been better for than Galaxy, given what everything Ash just said. But yeah, I just want to bring that up real quick, because I did feel like that at least, the climax of this game did feel epic. With you hopping from planetoid to planetoid as Bowser getting closer and closer, and I believe, if I recall correctly, like the music gets more intense the closer Bowser is.
I think it does.
So it does feel like in that moment at least that there are stakes.
Yeah, no, like gameplay-wise, certainly. I mean, like I don't remember both final battles perfectly to like compare and contrast the two. I feel like I remember thinking they were pretty similar, but maybe not. But certainly, in a gameplay sense, moment to moment, it is intense because Galaxy 2 can get pretty difficult. Like outside of Sunshine, I'd say. I'm thinking, I'd say Galaxy 2 is probably the hardest 3D Mario game after Sunshine.
Well, at least intentionally hardest.
Yeah, right, yeah. And, you know, and I remember there were plenty of stages where it felt exhilarating and, you know, I had sweaty palms and, you know, no doubt about that. It's just there is a certain feeling that Galaxy 2 didn't carry over from Galaxy 1.
Yeah.
Not just in how it being original, but just, again, there's an epic narrative feel to the game, which again I realize sounds crazy for Mario, but that's what I liked so much about Galaxy 1 is that they were willing to try something like that and succeed.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I don't know if they could have even, I don't know how they could have even matched that, so I think perhaps not even trying to was the right idea for a sequel. And just like really double down on the gameplay element. And that's a part that, you know, I've been talking a lot about like revisiting the game. I think that's a part that is for me at least the most important when revisiting, because I have the same memories you do too, Ash. I love Mario Galaxy 1, and again, I haven't revisited in a few years now, so it's possible that what I might think is different from how I actually would feel in the moment. But I think when I go back to revisiting games, I just want to like hone in on the gameplay. So while I have those fantastic memories of Mario Galaxy 1, when it comes to revisiting, you know, I'm not going to get quite the same feel I would from replaying that again as I am from Mario Galaxy 2, I would think. With that said, yeah, I would love if they could re-explore those ideas further down the line. But I do like that the two games do stand apart. You know, you have the greater narrative focus in Mario Galaxy 1, whereas Mario Galaxy 2 is just really, hey, here's a whole bunch of gameplay. It's basically just shoving a whole bunch of sugar in your face, and I love that.
That's a really good way to put it. It's just like it's letting you have your breakfast, lunch, dinner, and as much dessert as you want all at once.
Pretty much.
That is very much what Galaxy 2 feels like, yeah.
Overload.
It's interesting how much that affects us, though, because the actual narrative elements of Galaxy 1 are tiny. Like, there's a few cutscenes, barely any, though.
Right.
But it's amazing how that sets the tone for the rest of the game, even if it's just a few minutes of the overall package.
That's a good point. I mean, I think too, I think it's also the setting, the fact that you are in space so often, that just kind of just naturally gravitate or, lend to the scale of the adventure. So they do kind of go hand in hand, where everything just feels just a little bit grander given everything, which speaks to Ash's point. So yeah, so I get it. Both games are doing similar ideas in a different way, and that's kind of interesting. I'm kind of glad they did that again, because I remember my initial reaction to Mario Galaxy 2 was, my concern was it would diminish the original, because I'm like, well, they'll probably, they'll hopefully just make a better game, which will just eclipse the original, and you know what, and I would think that would almost do a disservice to the original game existing. And to some extent, that is kind of what happened for me, because I think I do prefer revisiting this one, but as we're touching on, the original stands apart for its own reasons, and I appreciate that. These two massive titans in the gaming industry, at least for 3D platformers, or really across all gaming, these are two of the highest rated games of all time, that they can stand apart still and stand together is awesome to me. That's such a cool thing, that a direct sequel to Mario Galaxy 2 was able to go toe-to-toe, if not exceed it, while not diminishing the original entirely.
Yeah, and just look at other Mario games to see the comparison. Like New Super Mario Brothers, there are 4 installments of that, and each one just sort of they kind of just replace the other, because they all feel so similar.
Which one's
Whereas
which?
Galaxy and Galaxy 2 share the same engine, they're on the same console, they look really similar. Yet, just in terms of pure variety and level design, they stand apart, just on those 2 merits alone.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally agree.
So I want to circle back real quick to actually one of those elements that helps Mario Galaxy 2 stand out, being Yoshi, because we touched on him already, but I want to give just a little bit more attention, because even though Yoshi isn't necessarily a huge part of this game, it definitely is part of what gives Mario Galaxy 2 a different character, both literally and figuratively. And I love Yoshi in this game. I don't think they could have implemented him any better. Like, you compare it to what they did with Yoshi in Mario Sunshine, which is a tragedy, and it is so much better. He's just so much better implemented here, where he doesn't just exist for the sake of existing. He adds core mechanics that work so well with the hardware, being the Wii pointer, that are just so darn fun to use. I love being able to use his tongue and lap up enemies, or grab platforms and fling myself through the air. Like, these levels feel like jungle gyms when you're playing as Yoshi. And sense of precision as well, letting you aim in 360 degrees, which is something that's tricky in the law of games, yet just is not at all in Mario Galaxy. And it bums me out that we don't really have a suitable Wii pointer replacement on any platform, really, aside from maybe VR. And the fact that we may never get mechanics like this again anytime soon bums me out, because it's so good. Yoshi's just so fun, especially when you add in all the power-up mechanics you were touching on, John, that really just enhance what all you can do with them.
Me calling Yoshi a power-up earlier might be a bit of a disservice to him, because he's here for this adventure. Like, when you finish a level, he's celebrating with you, and right at the end of the game, he waves goodbye to you. Like, he's basically a companion.
I made a whole video about it.
Yeah. And, I think just the way levels are designed around Yoshi, rather than him being an optional power-up, it not only introduces more opportunities for these exciting designs, but it makes Yoshi just feel like an event when he appears in a level. Like, you associate those levels with him because of that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yoshi, he was perfectly implemented, and you just kind of hit on it right there, John. It felt like an event every time you got to a new level that was designed around him. You're like, oh yes, another Yoshi level. Like that, I always got really excited about every new Yoshi level I got to, and that's, really, you guys already touched on it, it's because he was implemented so well. And as you were saying, Andre, we've still never quite seen any implementation quite like that since, in terms of using the pointer in 3D space. And even though it's not quite as ubiquitous, it was very satisfying to me in a way that collecting star bits by pointing at them around the screen was too. Like again, that's a little bit more ubiquitous in the sense that you're always doing that, but it always felt so satisfying to me in the same way that playing as Yoshi did in Galaxy 2. It was just kind of a rarer and more special experience in that case.
Yeah.
But it felt really great, and playing as Yoshi felt meaningfully different, but also super exciting. And I love that about him in Galaxy 2.
Yeah, you kind of touched on something there too with the star bits, which of course were in Mario Galaxy 1. And that's kind of like a good example of how Mario Galaxy 2 builds on the original, because in that game, in both games, collecting star bits is satisfying, but it's ultimately a pretty passive behavior. You can't fail at it. You just wave your Wii remote around and collect whatever is on the screen. But the Wii remote is actually barely used, or the pointer rather, was actually barely used in a gameplay sense in the original, only for the pull stars, and I believe in the levels where Mario's in a bubble and you can blow him around, which weren't even that good anyway to my memory. So Mario Galaxy 2 actually turns that into an intrinsic gameplay mechanic by making it essential to Yoshi and how you go about these levels. And that's what I really enjoyed. It really showed how you could use a pointer in a 3D-based platformer, which again is something we haven't seen much of either before or since. And yeah, that part kind of bums me out.
Well, talking about this also, makes me think of something interesting. There are those rumors going around right now, we don't know if they're true or not yet, about these, 3D Mario remasters potentially coming to the Switch later this year. If they do include Galaxy 2, how do they do that? Like, how is that actually going to work? And again, assuming they're even going to be in there, or any of this is true, but if it is true, how are they going to... there's implement that?
There's two ways I can think of. One, Mario Galaxy already exists in China, I believe, on the NVIDIA Shield. Right. And in that case, you use the right control stick to control the Starbit pointer.
Okay.
And I can't see that feeling anywhere near as good as the pointer itself, or being anywhere near as accurate, but that is one way they could do it. But again, I think in Yoshi's case, where you need that precision, that probably wouldn't work. So the other alternative is you can do what other Switch games are doing, where the Joy-Con itself does act as a pointer, but the problem is there's no actual recalibration option built in beyond resetting it manually, and that is going to negatively affect how it works. You're going to have to reset that manually every few probably every 10-20 seconds to make sure it stays accurate. And so yeah, if it does end up coming, it's going to be an inferior experience no matter what, I think.
Right, and I think to say nothing about how just the IR nature of the pointer on the Joy-Con it's also just less precise itself. So it's not going to feel quite as snappy and as smooth as it did on the Wii.
Right.
They could go the third-person shooter route, like in Breath of the Wild, and have you hold a button down to bring the pointer up. But I think that kind of gets in the way as well, though, because always having that pointer on screen means you never forget about it, and there's so many star bits to get. So I can't see getting rid of it permanently being a good thing.
Right. Now, something you touched on earlier, John, related to Yoshi, was how he does add a personality to this game, with him being along for the journey and waving at the how he waves at you when you're on your way to the final boss if you manage to hold on to Yoshi up to that point. That is such an adorable detail. And that kind of gets back to what I was saying with how this game just makes me feel happy. When I play Mario Galaxy 2, I go to my happy place. And where I just have a smile on my face. Everything about this game just seems designed for you to have a good time, for you just have a really positive experience. And that goes beyond just the game design and level design, which absolutely adds to it through the music and visuals. But even how the characters will cheer you on too. I love how happy the Lumas are. In the final level again, the Lumas are actively cheering you on as you go. And it's just those little touches that I think really just add to just how fun this game is. Without it ever feeling too easy, I think this game is probably more difficult than the original, I think. I could be wrong on that. But I never feel even though it might be, it's not an impossible game by any stretch, but it feels like it challenges you just enough. They don't get frustrated while still having a good time.
I like the new species as well. There's that species of wood people who don't appear very often, but they have such cool designs.
Yeah.
And the level that hosts them, that slide level that plays the Mario 64 slide theme.
Yes.
That's such a good level.
So cool.
I actually, in Mario Galaxy 1, I was one of those people who really did I love the manta ray surfing, which is something that people generally don't like looking back on it. And I love that Galaxy 2 kind of doubled down on that, because there's a couple of levels in the vein of that kind of level. There's the one where you're flying on a bird, and you're guiding it around this and trying to win the race. I think that's such a great level. I love those little sort of bite-sized challenges where it just shakes up the gameplay and gives you something entirely new.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. There's so many ideas in this game. It's changing constantly. You barely see an idea reused in Mario Galaxy 2. Every level feels entirely unique from the previous one, and that is something that's just truly impressive. And getting back to what you were saying about the slide, I love that level too. That's such a fun level. It reminds me, it basically feels like Mario's version of City Escape from Sonic Adventure 2.
That's true.
Right? It's such just a fun little thing, and you don't really see a slide again in the game. It's like a one and done thing, and then you move on. They could probably made a whole level or a whole game made out of slides, and I would have loved it. But no, there's so many ideas in this game that you could build it probably entire concepts around, and yet they explore it for a stage and move on, you know? And it kind of like makes me feel like they could make a Mario Galaxy 3 with the same intent as Mario Galaxy 2 originally, and just keep building on the unused ideas or expanded ideas of this, just to give us something even more.
Well, I think you just hit on something there. There's a reason that conversation around a possible Galaxy 3 continues to this day, and that's because Galaxy and Galaxy 2 as a whole made such an enormous impact on 3D Mario in a way we hadn't seen since Super Mario 64. And, you know, sure, there are people out there who want Sunshine 2 or another 3D world. You know, I'm not saying that those games don't deserve sequels. I know probably Andre would say Sunshine doesn't. But, you know, there's a reason, though, that Galaxy specifically endures, and that people still say they want a Galaxy 3. And that's because it still felt like there was so much more they could explore, despite the incredible number of ideas on display in both games, especially the second one. And, you know, going back to Galaxy 2 for a second, I was going to say, one of the things I loved about it, you guys are talking about the manta ray levels, which I also loved, but I also liked that Galaxy 2 wasn't afraid to scale it back a bit when it needed to, and it devoted a surprisingly decent chunk of the game to 2D levels. Like, I really love those 2D cylindrical levels, where you're going up and down, and like your viewpoint stays the same. It's from a 2D viewpoint, but the cylinder, kind of moves up and down depending on whether Mario's ascending or descending. Mm-hmm. And there was a surprising amount of content in that game that was played from a 2D perspective, and I thought that was really cool. And I don't remember at the moment if Galaxy 1 had as much of that, but I feel like it didn't, and I really like that.
The game starts off 2D. It starts off in this 2D perspective and then gradually pushes you 3D.
In the storybook.
Oh, right, yeah.
That's ingenious, because I think most people playing this game probably came from New Super Mario Bros. Wii. Like that might be some people's first Mario game. And then think about Galaxy 2 being your first 3D game, and just sort of transitioning from 2D to 3D in this seamless screen transition. I think that's so clever.
Mm-hmm. It's a really good point.
That is super cool.
And that kind of speaks to, that also just reminded me of just like how crazy the platforming can get in this game, because it's not just like a conventional 3D game. You're running around like entire planets, jumping between planets as gravity is pulling you in various directions. And again, that's something we saw in Mario Galaxy 1 obviously as well, but Mario Galaxy 2 really further plays with those ideas. And so it is fun that they started off in the most simplistic way possible, being 2D, before rolling it out to 3D and eventually into space. So yeah, again, it just shows like the design and thought that goes into Nintendo games, and how it teaches you things without you even realizing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm actually watching some footage right now and it reminded me of one of my favorite mechanics and levels in Galaxy 2. And it's really any level that uses the flip panels, where every time you shake and Mario does a spin, the red platforms turn to blue, and back and forth. So you really have to plan out your jumps beforehand, or at least a few steps ahead, and know what you're doing before you get that extra little mid-air boost by shaking, because then the platforms underneath you are going to shift. And that might have been in Galaxy 1, but if it was used to much greater effect in 2.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what's cool about that too? Is it kind of teaches you about the little boost in the air. Because at some point you have to jump off a platform and shake in the air, and you might realize, oh, Mario gains some momentum when he does that. And I think that's something that a lot of players wouldn't know. Mm-hmm. So that's just a really cool way of teaching you the advanced mechanics, like the optional ones, that you don't need to use, but it's definitely going to help you out in some cases.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, while we're on the topic of mechanics, I mean, we could talk endlessly about the variety of ones on display here. But I think one of my favorites, beyond the ones you've already touched on, like Yoshi, is the drill. I love the drill in this game, with how you just dig through the ground at high speed before popping out the other side of the planet you're on. And again, that's something that they only use a handful of times in the game, when they could have really, it's another example of something they could have done far more with, but Nintendo held back and just made it stand out. Every mechanic feels unique and special when they pop up, because you never really see them again. And that might be why I enjoy the drill so much. Maybe had they made a whole game out of it, I wouldn't feel as positively about it. But when it pops up those few times, I'm like, oh, this is great.
The drill also has
Yeah.
a boss battle. Like, how many power-ups get their own boss battle in Mario?
Good point.
And that was a really fun boss battle too. That always stood out to me.
Right.
That's a great point about the power-ups, especially the drill, Andre, because none of them ever feel like, to me, from what I can remember, that they overstayed their welcome. And that is fascinating, because I think that most people, for a potential Galaxy 3, would be fine if they brought back a bunch of these, power-ups from the first two games, especially the second game, because none of them felt like they were overused, on top of layering, of course, even more new ideas into Galaxy 3. But yeah, Galaxy 2 is very good in terms of, very well considered in terms of its pacing. You never feel like you're doing the same thing twice, and if you are, it's spaced out enough that you feel like it's fresh again by the time you get to the next instance of that. And usually,
Spaced out enough.
when... Yeah, and usually when you get to another instance of something you've done before, there's some twist on it, or the level designs are different in such a way that it makes you rethink what you thought you understood about that mechanic. And it is such a wonderfully paced game.
Getting more specific on power-ups as well, I love the cloud power-up. That is one of the best platforming power-ups in a Mario game. What's cool about it too, like, first it lets you make your own platforms, and that's such a cool platforming mechanic, just like they make little bits to jump on whenever you want to. But it's limited, and once you've ran out of it, it still has a use, because Mario's all floaty, even after you've used it. And using that cloud power-up just leads to some great platforming moments where you can skip entire chunks, just because of how floaty Mario is. I think it's such a cool... I don't think any other power-up's have been quite like that before.
No, it effectively lets you modify the stage. And that's really neat. It reminds me just a little bit... Oh god, I can't believe I'm saying this. It reminds me a little bit of the mode in New Super Mario Bros. U, where if you're playing with the gamepad, you can tap it to make a platform appear. But this is a game actually designed with it in mind. And yeah, it is a really fun mechanic. And again, something we haven't seen return since. So I would love it if that happened, if we saw more of the cloud power-up at some point. And there's so many power-ups that are like that. We have you can turn into a Boo in a few levels and float through float through platforms. What else is there? There's Rock Mario, who can roll along the ground at high speed.
Feels like the Goron from Majora's Mask.
Yeah,
just put into Mario.
Right, and there's even a whole bowling stage based around that idea. One of the things that stands out to me, and maybe one of the reasons why I love the hub in this game, although it's also one of the reasons why I enjoyed going back to the hub in Mario Galaxy 1, is the music. The hub music for the Face Ship might be the happiest darn tune Nintendo has ever made. And I love, too, how in kind of typical Mario fashion, it gets added to as you go through the game with more instruments being introduced. And maybe that's why I really don't mind the hub at all, because I can just chill there for as long as I need to catch my breath and just take in the music, because it's such a lovely, fantastic track that just instantly puts me in the right mood.
Is it a hot take to say, I like that track, but I prefer the Comet Observatory?
They're two very different tracks.
I was about to say the same thing, John. Yeah, they have different feels. I think they're supposed to kind of give you different feelings. I think Galaxy 2 it feels like a brighter, more just lighter game. It's lighter in tone, whereas Galaxy is a bit darker, a bit heavier, and I think the Comet Observatory theme kind of reflects that. And I also prefer that song, but I think they both work really well in the context of their own games, and they both do that really cool thing, as you said, Andre, where the new layers are added onto the music as you progress through the game, and I love that. And speaking of the music in general, one thing I love about the series, both 1 and 2, and 2 carried it forth so well, is the introduction of this orchestrated, bombastic, lush feel for Mario music that we hadn't really ever had before. It almost felt like you were playing a Disney movie in terms of the musical style. Mario had never quite had that really lush, orchestrated approach before, and not that it ever needed it, but I don't think it was something people ever expected out of Mario. So when you first hear that in Mario Galaxy, it's like, whoa, this is a completely different feel for Mario, and that went a long way, I think, toward adding to that epic feeling in Galaxy 1. But Galaxy 2 carries it forth so well. I mean, immediately you hear Sky Station Galaxy, and it's like, oh man, I am in for an adventure. And not just this would be a good time. Like, this is an adventure with a capital A, and that song tells you you're about to have an amazing time. And the music carries forth throughout that entire experience. I mean, melty molten galaxy and you know, all the Bowser levels, and you know, there's so much great music in these games, and you know, especially 2, and I just you know, that I think the music went a long way toward the unique feel that these games still have, even among different Mario games. But you still see later Mario games inspired by that, like 3D World, for instance.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, some of that same music even appears in 3D World, I think.
That's true, but yeah.
Wait, it is kind of interesting to see how Galaxy just had this legacy around it. Like, in Mario Kart 8, there's a track that uses a riff from Mario Galaxy.
Right.
And, like, Rosalina as a character, I don't think that it's very rare that Mario introduces a new character to the franchise that sticks around. And Rosalina she's been in pretty much every spin-off since her conception. Like, Mario Galaxy just has such a legacy to it that I don't think any other Mario game has quite had before. Not since.
No, you're absolutely right. Like, there is a legacy to these games, and I think that's one of the bittersweet things about this being 10 years out now from Mario Galaxy 2, is that I love this game. It still holds up. It looks fantastic. Even on my HD TV, by the way. Granted, I'm not sitting that close to it. But sitting back, this game looks just phenomenal still. Like, they could put this in HD, bam, you're set. You don't have to worry about touching any of the assets, I'm pretty sure. I think it's ready to go. And I hope that happens. But that's the bitter part of this whole thing, is that we haven't seen any re-releases of this, and we haven't even seen any kind of like sequel to this game, any proper follow-up. There's been no Mario Galaxy 3, no hint of it. We've had other Mario games in the, as you touched on, with 3D Land, 3D World, and of course Mario Odyssey now. But all those scratch very different itches to what Mario Galaxy does now, I think. Mario Odyssey went back to the more open nature of Mario 64, which I appreciate for its own reasons. But I think now, especially after revisiting Mario Galaxy 2 and replaying the entire darn game for a Game of the Decade discussion, it's like, yeah, there's something about this game series that Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 specifically, that no other Mario game quite matches for me. And I would love if they either A, re-released it, which it sounds like they may be, but 2, built upon those ideas even farther. I think there's even more they could do. I think there's infinite more they could do with the whole space gravity idea, and I would love if they made a proper sequel to this game now.
You got that sense with the reaction to the announcement of 3D World, because at the time people were very disappointed by what it was.
Right.
And some people even said that Galaxy looked better than it visually. And like, from an artistic perspective, I can kind of see that. Like, 3D World has this kind of plasticky look to it, and I think it's a nice looking game, but Galaxy just looks so defined and different to what Mario's ever looked like before. It wasn't just this sort of cookie cutter kind of art style, it was something entirely unique. And people thought that kind of approach was missing from 3D Land and 3D World, and looking back, I think I even agree today that Galaxy 1 and 2 just felt so much more substantial and bigger, and like it felt like a lot was riding on these games, whereas 3D World was kind of just another take on Mario.
I think part of it too is that Mario Galaxy feels more cinematic. The camera by design in 3D Land and 3D World is more retro, I suppose. Like, they were like, those games are basically taking the mechanics of 2D and putting them in 3D. Whereas Mario Galaxy, the camera's kind of all over the place. You know, whether it's when you're running around the globe, but even especially when you're like flying between planetoids, and you get these really cool cinematic angles, and it really kind of helps mix it up. I'm reminded specifically of when you first get Yoshi and take the first launch star, and you shoot past the volcano as it erupts, shooting star bits everywhere, and it just looks amazing and feels so cool to be on this super short, like, cutscene, if you will, that just links up these different sections, and that's something that the 3D Land and 3D World games are missing entirely.
Because these aren't sandbox games, but they do feel big.
Right,
it's just the illusion of largeness that they give you.
Well, that's what's so interesting, is as I was actually going to say earlier that I would liken Galaxy 2 to almost like a big box of toys. Like, Galaxy 1 feels like this, you know, grand quest that you're going on with all these cool new ideas being introduced for the first time. But then Galaxy 2 feels like it takes that, turns it on its ear, and now it's just like this big toy box of cool new things and things you've seen before but done in new ways for you to just play around in. And even though you guys, as you said, it's not a sandbox game, it kind of feels like one in a lot of instances. And so Galaxy 2 feels to me like it's Nintendo operating at their maximum confidence level. Like, they were firing on all cylinders. I think that's you know, exemplified by that moment you mentioned, Andre, when you're flying past the volcano at the beginning of the game, and it's like, whoa, Nintendo, like, they are firing on all cylinders here, and it just felt like they had a certain confidence in this game that I don't know if they've necessarily ever matched that feeling for me ever since this game. In terms of just, yeah, I guess confident is that. I mean, Odyssey definitely is an amazing game, but even that still didn't feel quite as confident and quite as, I don't know. It's a hard feeling to, it's a hard feeling to describe, but it just didn't quite feel the same.
Is it though? I think you just described it using the same word 4 times, being confident.
Yeah.
And it's fun that you use that word because it's one of my top notes on my little
really?
notepad
Okay,
here.
there you go.
I said it's confident in its level design, but I would apply that to the whole game as you were saying. Yeah, I agree. There is a confidence here. I would say Mario Galaxy 1 felt confident as well, but this game really doubles down on everything. And I think you that confidence does come through in a way that I would agree with you. I think even Mario Odyssey probably doesn't fully capture, and maybe a sequel to that game would. So yeah, and it is kind of interesting to compare it now, like going back to Mario Galaxy 2 after playing Mario Odyssey. That I loved. I mean, I gave Mario Odyssey a mind-blowing rating. I will say though, I think, and it could be that we're just too recent to that game, so maybe it's not a fully fair assessment because it's been many years since I played Mario Galaxy 2 until recently. But I think when it comes to revisiting these games, I think I do prefer Mario Galaxy 2. I think it's just like the pacing is perfect. It's mixing things up constantly. And whereas I have tried revisiting Mario Odyssey a couple of times, never like entirely in earnest, as more for like, you know, I just needed something to do or I was grabbing footage or something. But it doesn't strike me as immediately fun to revisit as Mario Galaxy 2 does. And I'm not really complaining. I give it our highest score. But I think it speaks more to just how freaking good Mario Galaxy 2 is that I can revisit this game seemingly endlessly and have a great time.
I think with Odyssey as well, Odyssey is an exploration game. Like the platforming in that game is about traversal. It's about traversal rather than just trying to do these platforming challenges. And that's kind of personal. I don't think that's the kind of thing you do over and over, because once you've found all the stars, or all the moons even, that's kind of that. I think it's okay to like put 90 hours into Odyssey and then never do it again. But one thing Odyssey can learn from Galaxy 2, though, is to be a sequel, because I think there's so much in store for the Odyssey series that they can keep tapping into. It's just one of those games where there's clearly a lot more potential. There's clearly a lot more kingdoms you can visit, a lot more power-ups, a lot more creatures to capture, and I'm so excited for the future of an Odyssey sequel after what Galaxy 2 has shown us.
So I have a question for you guys. Odyssey 2 or Super Mario Galaxy 3?
Galaxy
that's
3.
hard. I think I'd go just for the potential aspect. I think I'd go Odyssey 2, because Galaxy, we've had 2 games already, and there's clearly more potential there. But Odyssey, I feel like there's just so much they can tap into still.
And that's all true, no doubt about it. And maybe it's just the soft spot I have for Galaxy. Maybe it's just because I have always wanted a Galaxy 3, but it's Galaxy 3 for me. Odyssey 2, I think there's a lot more they could explore within that space than they could Galaxy 3, because again, Odyssey hasn't had a sequel yet. But as I said before, I loved Odyssey. It's a great game, but I bounced off of it a little faster than I expected to compared to other 3D Mario games, especially the Galaxy games. And so, if it's coming from a pure hype standpoint, I think it's got to be Galaxy 3 for me, although I do concede that there are more things and new ideas for them to explore in the context of an Odyssey 2.
What if they made Super Mario Odyssey Galaxy? If you're Cappy, in space.
They did that in 3D World. Like right at the end, there's a Rosalina-themed kingdom, a world that you visit at the end there.
That's a good point.
If they did like some kind of kingdom that's just entirely revolved around Galaxy ideas, that'd be amazing.
That'd be really
we do
cool.
visit the moon at the end of Odyssey, so
yeah,
it's not impossible.
What we should do is go the whole GBA Mario port route and make it Super Mario Odyssey 2, Super Mario Galaxy 3. There you go. That's the full name.
Yeah, for me personally, God, it's tough. I adored both games, but I think if I had to choose between the two, I might go Galaxy 3. Probably because it's just been longer since we've seen them. And I think there are still so many ideas left that they could explore. Even in a space setting. Like, I wouldn't mind if they went back to more of the space setting in Mario Galaxy 1. Because I think like the one thing I keep going back to is I would love if there were like some kind of asteroid field that you had to like jump between from like asteroid to asteroid. Either maybe if something's chasing you, or I don't know, maybe you have to knock them around. I just think there's a lot of ideas they could explore by maybe opening up the game just a little bit. And this is one idea I had actually, maybe it kind of speaks more to my Super Mario Odyssey 2 idea as we were just all kind of chiming in with. Like, what if they had the way they kind of combine the elements of Mario Galaxy 2 with some of the more open levels of 64 or Odyssey, where maybe you have like these giant, like these like multiple hub levels, for instance, which are like these giant planets, which give you a more focused experience, which then have their own moon systems or whatever, which then gives you the more structured levels of Mario Galaxy. It's kind of like making it like a half and half type thing.
Yeah, that could be interesting. You kind of get the best of both worlds in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Galaxy does kind of try and be a sandbox at times, because at the end of the game there are those green stars, and it doesn't, like, I think it's just the execution that they had, but it doesn't really work. And I think the reason it doesn't work is because it kicks you out all the time. Mm-hmm. And just like going back and forth into level trying to find more green stars, that got tedious.
I'm glad I bring that up. That was the one thing I was going to bring up. That's probably the biggest mark against this game, is because when I revisited Mario Galaxy 2 for our Game of the Decade discussion, I ended up playing through the entire darn thing until I got to the green stars. And initially I'm like, oh yeah, I'll just keep on going, but I forgot what a drag they are, as you have to re-enter the same level 3 additional times, track down each star, retreading mostly the same terrain you already had for the previous 2 stars plus the main game, and it just got too much to me. But then I remembered that I had an unfinished file that already had most of the green stars, so I just picked it up from there, and luckily that wasn't too bad, finishing off the ones I hadn't yet collected. But I agree, that's probably the biggest weakness of this game. But it's a post-game, so I don't really care that much, you know? I will say, though, that the Final Galaxy reward is probably one of the coolest I've seen in the Mario game, where I actually streamed my time with it. It took me 3 freaking hours to beat it, but I loved it. It felt fair, but extremely tough, and I had a great time, and it felt such a sense of satisfaction from completing that level and finishing Mario Galaxy 2 finally after nearly 10 years.
That kind of set a standard for future Mario titles too, because since then, every 3D Mario has had this crazy hard level at the end of it.
Yeah, 3D
like you've
World.
got, what was the name of 3D World's one?
I don't remember.
Something Road.
Champion Road,
that's it. And then then Odyssey has like the darkest side of the moon or whatever. So like
that one sucked. I'm sorry. That one straight up was one of the most disappointing final 3D Mario level in my opinion.
I liked it, but I will say Galaxy 2's being so much trickier. It felt like a reward once you finally finished it. It's this sigh of relief. Like, I've done everything in this game. I've conquered the hardest level. Like, you feel good. It's a great feeling to finally do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll never forget how I felt when I first beat that level, and I think to me it probably does represent the pinnacle of like post-game, in-game 3D Mario challenges. But that I was actually going to say much of what you guys said in terms of the green stars. Not the best way to present a post game in my opinion. And it was funny is I wouldn't say the post game is more important than the main quest to me, but as I've said to you before, Andre, because I love 3D platformers and 2D platformers so much, I really look forward to those crazy challenges. And that was something where I felt Odyssey was lacking, but Galaxy and Galaxy 2 nailed it, except for the fact that Galaxy 2 had, the green star whole thing. And another thing I want to mention is that I did feel that Galaxy 2 over-relied on the cosmic clones a little bit too much. I always remember being disappointed when I would get to a prankster comet or some late game challenge, and instead of being like get all the purple coins or some new challenge, it would be the whole cosmic clone thing. That whole thing just annoyed me, and it felt like not a lazy way. I never want to say lazy, but it just felt like an uninteresting way to make levels you'd already played through harder, but in an artificial way, and I didn't find those as fun, personally.
That's interesting, because I'd say for being artificial, I'd say the 1 life levels are the most artificial, because it's literally just the same thing again, but limiting you to 1 hit point, and if you fail, you have to do the entire thing again.
I forgot about that.
And that is what actually makes the final level so difficult, because it actually isn't that tough beating the initial time. It's when you have to replay it with only 1 health point that it becomes nearly impossible. It took me 3 hours to do so.
I mean, literally the perfect run. That's what you have to do. It's called the perfect run, and that's what it requires.
Well, I think we've touched on most of the major element of this game, at least to some degree, but is there anything else you guys want to bring up before we fully wrap it up here?
I was always a bit disappointed that I forget the name of the power-up. In Mario Galaxy 1, there was this power-up that was barely used that let you fly around. And I think it was only used in the hub world, and also for a purple coin level.
Correct.
And Galaxy 2 just didn't bring it back.
I was okay with that, because I never liked the flight mechanic that much. Like, especially because I was reminded of Mario 64, where flying was an absolute blast. And here, it just felt weak, so that might be why they dropped it, because it wasn't, for me at least, I didn't find it inherently fun. It was novel, like, it was kind of cool as like a post-game thing. It's like, oh, I can fly, neat. But it wasn't that fun in and of itself, I think.
Yeah, I think I was just waiting for the correct context for it, really, because it was never really given a chance to be great, and I always wanted to just let it be free, and they never really had that opportunity. Which I guess it's not necessarily a bad thing against Galaxy 2. It's just I always felt that was an underwhelming power-up that needed better use.
It felt like a weirdly empty reward, kind of in the same way Yoshi in Mario 64 does. After you get all 120 stars, and he gives you like a ton of lives, but you don't need them by then. Like, what's the point? And then so you get this end of game power up in Galaxy 1 that lets you fly, and at first it's like, whoa, this is so cool. How am I going to use this? And then you don't really. And so I hear you, John. I agree. And also, and this is, I guess, it's less a knock against Galaxy 2 and I guess more Galaxy 1 since it originated there, but I wouldn't really mind not having Spring Mario come back. I feel like Spring Mario is probably the weakest, So, like, both games had Spring Mario, and, both games implemented it well enough, but I wouldn't mind if it didn't come back.
My favorite thing about Spring Mario is, in most cases, you can actually just ignore it and just go through the level without it, which kind of speaks to, how the power-up just isn't that fun. So I do agree with that as a weak power-up.
That's one thing that's really fun about both Galaxy games, is you can just go past a lot of these obstacles, because you can do the backflip, you can do the spin in the air, and sometimes you can catch the gravitational pull of nearby planetoids and just skip entire platforming sections. So these games are just so fun to speedrun and return to and replay, just because you can mess with them, you can break them, and that's part of why it's just so incredibly fun to keep revisiting these levels.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I don't replay games that often, but replaying Mario Galaxy 2 has been a complete blast, especially, or even today, just a few months after my last playthrough. I could easily sat down for a few more hours and just kept on going, but unfortunately work got in the way, and this very discussion. Anything? Oh, also real quick, I'm just looking at footage right now of Mario swimming around in the Koopa shell, and this game, this is a game where even swimming is fun. Even the water-based mechanics are enjoyable. There's a good sense of momentum. You have a decent amount of control, whether you're swimming by with Mario himself or with the Koopa shell. And again, the fact that you can run on water as Yoshi is just amazing. Yeah,
swimming was super fun in both games, and I was actually going to add to that. If we do get these, potential ports on Switch that are, remastered or whatever, I hope we get similar HD Rumble for any swimming portions that we got in Odyssey, because that's still my favorite HD Rumble probably in any game so far.
Oh, what would be really cool is with the Koopa shell in this game, it even has brake lights if you slow down. It'd be so neat if they gave it like a motorcycle-like feel through the HD Rumble.
God, the more I think about this, there's so much they could do with HD Rumble and potential Galaxy remasters.
I think there's so much more they could do with Mario Galaxy in general, as I was saying earlier. I just had another idea where I think there was one element that I think they could really add to Mario Galaxy, and that is the levels for the most part are pretty static, which is kind of surprising given a space setting. The actual environments don't really move around much, if at all, besides like the occasional moving platform. And that's something they could really crank up, I think, in a future game. Like, have like a moon spinning around the planet that you can first off figure out how to get to, and then when you're riding on the moon, you're flying around a giant planet below. Maybe that's how you use it to reach areas on the planet you couldn't otherwise access. So I think there's so much more they could do, like adding a greater sense of kinetic energy to the Galaxy theme.
Yeah, like, building upon that as well, there were some levels with airships, and the airships don't move.
Right, they're stationary.
They're literally static the entire time. It's like a level with, like, spaceships and airships that are just moving around the entire time, creating new platforms. Yeah, that could be really, really cool.
Yeah, I think they could go absolutely nuts, especially with the increased hardware power of the Switch. They could give us some truly insane level designs.
These games also gave us Captain Toad as a character.
Yeah.
It'd be really cool to get little Captain Toad levels in like a Galaxy 3 that still play by the rules of Captain Toad, but with anti-gravity.
Oh.
That would be interesting. I like that idea.
Where you can't jump, but you have to use gravity to figure out how to get through. That's a
Captain Toad Galaxy
idea.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah. All right. Any other final thoughts, everyone, before we wrap it up here?
I just think very few sequels can be so similar to the original and stand on their own.
Right?
Most of the time we just say, oh, this is too iterative, this is too samey, and Galaxy 2 has all those traits, but it's just magical. It pulls it off so well.
You know what the other game is, besides Portal that I mentioned earlier, that does this, John? I think you know what game it is. You know what game it is.
I know what game I'm thinking
You're gonna
of.
kick yourself as soon as I say it,
Oh,
John.
Tropical Freeze!
Yes!
Of course!
Nice.
Exactly. That's a game that fundamentally is the same as its predecessor, and yet it builds upon it in a way that is at the very least as strong, if not, I think you would agree with me, John, far better than the original. So, and that says something. Because DKCR was already a great game in its own right.
Sorry, I gotta say it. Mega Man 2 and 3 are lauded for the exact same thing. Bigger and better than Mega Man 1 in every way, but it's so similar. And so I'd never made that comparison in my own mind before, but that's actually true. People were saying the same exact thing about Mega Man 2 in the late 80s that we're saying about Galaxy 2 now, so I find that to be an interesting comparison. And I agree with you both about Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze as well.
You had to get Mega Man into this discussion.
Yeah, I did. I hadn't planned it. I swear to God, I hadn't planned it, but it just came to me. I'm looking at some footage right now, and I just saw footage of one of the levels, I guess, where you have to guide a golden chain chomp along rails to get to get them into the hole, and then the golden chain chomp breaks and you get the star. Stuff like that is what makes not just Galaxy 2, but Galaxy in general so memorable and so interesting and unique, and I'd say Galaxy 2 especially from a gameplay sense. And that's just stuff like that. We haven't seen anything like that in other Mario games. Like, it's just, there's so much going on in this game, so many interesting ideas that typically don't ever get overused. So I just kind of wanted to bring that home.
The fact that we're now 10 years out from it is amazing and shocking and surprising. Any number of emotions you want to ascribe to it, especially because one other point you haven't touched on that I meant to earlier is this was my first review for Game Explained. This is my first actual review I did for the channel. And as part of this, I think I'm going to be doing a fun little thing on our Patreon page where I'm going to rewatch my own review and give my commentary along the way, whether I agree with the things I said back then, and how the quality of the review itself holds up over all this time. But that's also partially why I think Mario Galaxy 2 is special for me as well, because just as Mario Galaxy 2 itself is 10 years old, so is Game Explained, as we just celebrated a few months ago. So yeah, it's kind of fun. This is where Game Explained basically got its start.
Interesting. I think I knew that at some point, but had forgotten. So that's so cool that we're revisiting this in this same way, but this is such a significant game for you in that way.
Yeah.
And it's crazy how the legacy's just kept going. Like, at no point has Mario Galaxy 2 been diminished. I think we often look back on games and we're like, was it really that great? Or like successors sort of replace the emotions we had about them because they slowly get better. But nothing has been quite like Mario Galaxy 2. And I'm not sure if it ever will be. I think we'll still look back on this game in 10 years from now and it will still be just as excellent as it is right now.
I just hope we can look back on it in HD.
Let's hope so.
Well, yeah, and I think you're right, John, and something you guys mentioned earlier that I had forgotten is how special and incredibly surprising it felt when Galaxy 2 was first revealed, because as we mentioned, direct sequels to 3D Mario games were not a thing back then. Like, that just didn't happen. And, I mean, even direct sequels in general, like Super Mario Bros. 4, I mean, yeah, Mario World could be considered that, but, like, after that, though, there weren't really any other numbered sequels. So to get Galaxy 2, like a direct sequel, that was a big deal at the time. And that's something that hasn't quite been recreated in new Mario game announcements since then, I think. So, yeah, that's just something like that. That's one more thing that makes Mario Galaxy 2 special in its own way. Like, just the announcement of it was unheard of at the time.
Speaking of one more thing I would love to see in an HD remaster of this game. Labo VR support. I want to play through Mario Galaxy in VR. I don't care if it's at a low resolution. It would actually probably match the Wii's resolution, so I'm already used to that. I would love to play this game with like a sense of depth.
That would be so nausea-inducing, like flying through space in VR.
I'd be so down to try that.
Alright guys, I think we're finally done here, but is there anything else you wanted to get out there before we finally wrap it up? Finally.
Yeah, I think that's it really. I think Mario Galaxy 2 made the Wii feel HD at times. Like, it was insane how there was such a big power gap between the 360, PlayStation 3 and Wii. And we're used to the Wii getting the harsher side of the stick in most cases. But I think because of the limitations it had in store, this game just felt big. It felt like something you would see on 360.
Yeah. No, it looked great. As I said just a few moments or earlier in the discussion, it still holds up. Like, even though it is running at 480p, the art design is so strong that as long as you're sitting back a few feet, you can't really even tell. And that is a testament to Nintendo's designers, to their art designers, that this game still holds up 10 years later, even in an era where we're all used to, not just 1080p content, but increasingly so for 4K. But yeah, that's why I hope that these remasters end up being a thing, even if it sounds like Mario Galaxy 2 may not be part of it, but hey, here's hoping.
Right.
All right, and with that, I think we're about done covering Mario Galaxy 2. We went on a little bit longer than I expected, but that just speaks to the point of there being so much to talk about in this game. But we'd love to hear your thoughts about Mario Galaxy 2, so let us know in the comments below. What did you think of it? Did you think it was better than Mario Galaxy 1? Would you want to see a Mario Galaxy 3? We'd love to hear all your thoughts. And with that, thank you again for watching. Make sure to click on that subscribe button if you haven't already for tons more on future Mario games, hopefully, including the possible remasters, and everything else Nintendo as well. We'll catch you later. Bye.